It's a couple of hours now since we learned that the US President Joe Biden had made a surprise visit to Ukraine. He was on his way to Poland. These things are always done under great security. He turned up in Kyiv. He's had a joint news conference with the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. And let's go now to Jess Millwood in our European Bureau, Nine's European Bureau. Jess, good evening to you.
Good evening, John. Yeah, hugely significant and so symbolic, this visit of President Biden to Kyiv. It was unannounced. It was a complete surprise. Journalists on the ground said that the first anyone knew that something was happening was the internet actually stopped working, streets were being blocked off, and then they saw the presidential motorcade and Biden visiting a war memorial for fallen soldiers there. He also walked around the capital Kyiv with President Volodymyr Zelensky to the sound of air raid sirens. So if he needed a reminder that this was an active war, he certainly received one. It was quite extraordinary to see the two presidents walking around while that air raid was going off in the capital.
And as you said, they blocked the internet. They've got the security operation would have been monstrous. And I guess the internet's got to go down because there's mobile phones, all the ways people can communicate, maybe even trigger something or identify where the two leaders are, because they'd be a prime target as well. So all of that's unfolded. And then we had presentations from both of them.
We did, yes. And there was some speculation that the president may go into Ukraine because we know he does plan to visit Poland, but certainly the talk was that perhaps he would do that later in the week. Friday, the 24th of February, is the one-year anniversary since the war started. He's decided to go in a little bit earlier, perhaps due to there is going to be heightened security on the 24th. The two leaders sat down and had discussions. This was a symbolic visit, but also one with substance. New military aid will be provided to the Ukraine from the United States worth $500 million. They will receive new military from the US. Fighter jets is something President Zelensky has been really pushing for. And then they stood up and did a joint press conference. President Zelensky thanking the president for coming to Kyiv and thanking him for his support throughout the war. And then President Biden stood up, and here's some of what he had to say.
Russia's aim was to wipe Ukraine off the map. Putin's war of conquest is failing. Russia's military has lost half its territory it once occupied. Young, talented Russians are fleeing by the tens of thousands, not wanting to come back to Russia. Not just fleeing from the military, fleeing from Russia itself because they see no future in their country. Russia's economy is now a backwater, isolated and struggling. Putin thought Ukraine was weak and the West was divided. As you know, Mr. President, I said to you in the beginning, he's counting on us not sticking together. He was counting on the inability to keep NATO united. He was counting on us not to be able to bring in others on the side of Ukraine. He thought he could outlast us. I don't think he's thinking that right now. God knows what he's thinking, but I don't think he's thinking that. But he's just been plain wrong.
Yeah, and just as you say, very symbolic, but he's also talked about some of that equipment that they've been looking for, and I guess the detail of that will be fleshed out in the hours to come. Yeah,
that's right. He said more details will be provided on Tuesday, so that's tomorrow. He's going to Poland after this visit, so we will learn more. But what about that speech from President Biden? It was so strong indeed. If there was any doubts that Ukraine had the support of the West and support of the powerhouse that is the US, well, that was put to bed today. President Biden is saying, we will be with you, Mr. President, for as long as it takes. So the US are in this for the long haul. And as he said, I'm not sure what President Putin is thinking now. He did try and divide the West when he invaded the Ukraine nearly a year ago to the day. He has not achieved that. And today what we've seen is incredibly symbolic, with the US reaffirming their backing of Ukraine.
Yeah, we've just heard this is all been coordinated, because you've just had in the last couple of moments, we've just seen this come up. Japan's Prime Minister has announced a pledge of $5.5 billion, that's US, for additional aid in Ukraine. So it's pretty significant from Japan. And then we've got, of course, this visit tomorrow, as you say, to Poland, where he'll meet the Polish president and the leaders of what they're calling the Eastern Flank allies. So presumably that's going to be a lot more of what we've just heard.
Yeah, and this extra aid, this extra support is so desperately needed because Russia is expected to launch a spring offensive. In fact, Ukraine has said that that has already begun. So they desperately need this equipment. A year into this war now, Ukraine really needs that backup, and it is fighter jets that President Zelensky will continue to push for. The UK has said that nothing is off the table. And as a coincidence, while this is all happening in the Ukraine, the King Charles, will be visiting troops that are being trained here in the UK later this afternoon. They're being trained here and then sent back to the Ukraine. So the West, they're not divided. They're certainly united in their assistance of the Ukraine.
All right, Jess, we'll hear more from you, of course, on the Today Show tomorrow and through the day on Nine's news bulletins, the late news as well. Very significant, all of that happening, and I guess international response and anything else that comes in. We've seen it from Japan. They're obviously coordinating something here, so I guess you might have a busy night ahead of you. We'll hear all of your reports and see them on Nine as well. Thank you so much for that.
In the aftermath of Turkey's killer quakes, there is growing desperation among survivors and increasing anger over the government's response. But many people across the country are mobilising with opposition mayors to help, like in Istanbul. All through the night, people in Turkey's biggest city bring supplies for earthquake survivors. 2 wedding halls are now distribution centres for aid donated from across the city. Elif Polat, a salon manager, is in charge of sending aid to quake survivors.
From the oldest to the youngest, there's incredible unity here. We ask ourselves, how can we reach all these people in the quake-hit areas? I can see in everyone's eyes there is huge sorrow, but they get strength and motivation from their sadness. I've been here for the last 25 years, and I understood one more time in the last few days that we Turks are very strong.
Hundreds of volunteers work through the night. For some, the motivation is personal. One of those volunteers is Ali Can Koçak.
Because my parents live in Adana and my friends in Antakya, where the earthquakes hits the ground, and I can't go to this place, those places, and I want to help people. And nearest place to my house is here place, and I will come here, and my friends will come here.
The relief effort is being coordinated by Istanbul Mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu from the opposition CHP party. He has provided trucks and the use of city buildings for relief efforts. During İmamoğlu's visit to the disaster region, he offered condolences to families of the victims. He also met with search and rescue teams he had sent. Ankara's mayor, Mansur Yavaş, also a member of the opposition, also sent workers to rebuild one of the airports in the quake-stricken region. While the Turkish government has been criticised for its slow response to the quakes, the efforts by the mayors has stood out in stark contrast, says political scientist Soli Özel of Istanbul's Kadir Has University.
They appear to be competent, effective, and able to mobilize their resources much more rapidly, which shows that if you take the issue of the earthquake seriously and you made your preparations in responding to earthquakes, you can actually move mountains. And it also showed that the opposition is capable of getting things done, contrary to claims on the part of the government and also to our own observations about the opposition, that they can actually administer things, they can actually manage things. And in that sense, it was really truly a matter of taking the quake issue seriously, and evidently our government just did not.
The government denies such criticism, arguing the disaster is a once-in-a-century event. But there was similar criticism in 1999 over the response to the Izmit quake just outside Istanbul, which claimed more than 18,000 lives. Memories of that disaster are still fresh in the minds of some survivors and motivation to help in this latest crisis. Yilmaz, who only wanted to give his first name, remembers.
I experienced the 1999 Izmit earthquake. We lived through that disaster. It was extremely hard for us. Now I saw this earthquake and I relived those moments. That's why I couldn't sit at home and drink tea and wanted to rush here and offer help.
Diapers, antiseptic cologne and other sanitary products are priority items as Istanbul comes together to help, says wedding hall manager Elif Polat.
En yaşlısından tutun en gencine kadar.
We opened the wedding halls this morning. There's incredible help coming from everywhere. The aid is mostly food, blankets, and duvets, as well as hygiene goods, diapers, and an incredible amount of goods, all in first quality. Yesterday, we had a 10-minute or so crisis about the lack of cardboard boxes we had. We put out a message on social media, and heaps of boxes arrived immediately. It is awe-inspiring and beautiful.
İnşallah herkes çok iyi olacak.
A truck filled to bursting point is off to the disaster region, bringing help and hope to the millions of people in need. I'm Dorian Jones in Istanbul.
The African Union's annual summit is being held in Ethiopia's capital city, Addis Ababa. Trade throughout Africa is expected to be a top priority at the summit, especially because of the current food crisis and drought in Eastern Africa. Leaders are also expected to discuss peace negotiations in Ethiopia, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the Sahel region. Israel has complained after an Israeli diplomat was asked to leave the summit. An African Union spokesperson said that Sharon Bar-Lee was not the person who was agreed to represent Israel at the event. South Africa's state energy company, Eskom, has announced another increase in planned power cuts. South Africa has already been experiencing daily power cuts for months because of a lack of energy production, especially from coal-fired power plants. This weekend there were continuous power cuts from 8 p.m. to 5 a.m, and Eskom has said that this system could continue on further weekends. The body of Ghanaian footballer Christian Atsu has been found under a destroyed building in Turkey. In the UK, there was a minute's silence before a game between Liverpool and Newcastle, where Atsu played for 5 years before joining a Turkish club. Europe. In Germany, many world leaders met at the Munich Security Conference this weekend. United Kingdom Prime Minister Rishi Sunak encouraged all countries to increase support for Ukraine.
We must help Ukraine to shield its cities from Russian bombs and Iranian drones. And that's why the United Kingdom will be the first country to provide Ukraine with longer-range weapons.
United States Vice President Kamala Harris said that Russia has committed crimes against humanity in Ukraine.
There is no doubt. These are crimes against humanity.
Many organizations and human rights groups have documented war crimes committed by Russian forces in Ukraine over the last year, including murdering civilians, torture, rape, and the destruction of civilian infrastructure. Russia denies all of these claims. In an interview with Sky News, Polish President Andrzej Duda said that European countries should increase production of weapons and ammunition, and said that NATO is facing a test of whether it can stand up against Russian imperialism. China's foreign affairs diplomat Wang Yi said that China would announce a peace plan for Ukraine this week. In Ukraine, fighting is continuing to be most intense around the city of Bakhmut in the Donetsk region. Yesterday, 3 members of a family were killed by Russian artillery in the Kherson region, according to local officials. In Bulgaria, 18 people from Afghanistan have been found dead in a truck near the capital Sofia. 34 other people were rescued and are in hospital. Bulgaria has charged 6 people for involuntary manslaughter and participating in organised crime. Many refugees enter the European Union through Bulgaria. The United States has said that 3 objects that were shot down over the last 2 weeks were probably not related to China. Earlier this month, the US shot down a balloon, which it said was operated by the Chinese government and contained surveillance equipment. President Joe Biden said this weekend that investigations were continuing into the other 3 objects.
We don't yet know exactly what these 3 objects were, but nothing right now suggests they were related to China's spy balloon program or that they were surveillance vehicles from any other country.
Peru's police force has been accused of racism by Amnesty International. A new report said that, quote, excessive and lethal force was used by Peru's security forces against indigenous Peruvians, which were driven by a racist bias. Rights groups have said that at least 60 protesters have been killed since the removal of former President Pedro Castillo in December. Asia. Iran International, an independent Iranian television channel, has been forced to move its operations from the United Kingdom to the United States because of security threats. United Kingdom security services said that they were not able to protect the staff of Iran International, which often focuses on human rights stories, and was declared a terrorist organisation by Iran's government in November during large anti-government protests. London's police have said that they have stopped 15 attempts by Iran to murder or kidnap Iranian citizens in the UK over the last year. This weekend there were large protests in the eastern city of Zahedan. And India has received 12 cheetahs from South Africa, and they have been released into a national park in Madhya Pradesh. Cheetahs became extinct in India in the 1940s, but plans have been made to reintroduce cheetahs to some areas. That's your world news in 7 minutes. A big thank you to Claudia in Switzerland and Elena in Italy for becoming our newest supporters. If you'd like to become a supporter, then go to send7.org. Supporters also have access to the transcripts of every episode